Bonjour tout le monde. Bonjour.
Welcome to everyone. Welcome to the 6th edition of the annual public meeting of CBC Radio-Canada. I'm Rebecca McConnon, and I'm host of Circuit McConnon on EC Music, and I'm very happy to welcome you live to Studio 47, the Maison de Radio-Canada here in Montreal, and it's the very first time that we're having this in Montreal, and you can also follow us live on the web. We're being beamed out across Canada.
Welcome you all. Those of you who made the trip to Studio 47 in Montreal, and those of you that are tuning in live, thanks to our webcast from all across the country. My name is Rebecca, and I'm happy to greet you to our 6th annual public meeting. Also with us today are some of your favorite CBC and Radio-Canada personalities, and they're going to be joining me right here on stage later on for the second part of the event for a discussion on how CBC and Radio-Canada is transforming with you in mind. There will be a question period, a Q&A. Il y aura une période de questions.
So there will be a period of question and answer that will follow after the panel discussion. And if you want to send in questions to us now, we'll take them in the room. But if you want to send them in from anywhere in Canada, you can send them to the following address: APA commercial radio canada.ca/apm@cbc.ca, and you can also send questions to us via Twitter using the hashtag CBCAPM and also RCAPA.
By email at the following address: APM for annual public meeting @cbc.ca, or you can send us your questions via Twitter using the hashtag CBCAPM. On n'a que 30 minutes allouées à cette période.
We've just got 30 minutes, so please just one question per person and try and be concise as far as possible with your questions. So thank you to all of you for coming along today. And now I'd like you to welcome Mr. Rémi Racine, who's chairman of the board of CBC Radio-Canada. Thank you very much, Rebecca, and welcome to the 2014 annual public meeting taking place today here in la Maison de Radio-Canada, and welcome to all of you who are participating in the live webcast.
You an opportunity to participate in the role of your public broadcaster. So thank you for your interest. Plusieurs membres du Conseil sont présents.
The members of the board are here with us today, and I'd like to thank them for their presence. We can say that the last year has been a complicated one. We've talked a great deal about the work of the board, and some have suggested that there has been political interference in the direction that the corporation has taken. But I'd like to reassure you that the board of directors always discusses its matters in the interests of the corporation as set out in the Broadcasting Act, and it respects its oversight role. It keeps its eyes open, but it does not intervene. It certainly does not interfere in decisions linked to programming or the day-to-day management of the public broadcaster.
New 5-year strategic plan, a space for us all. It's a plan that calls for nothing short of a transformation.
Société.
The objective is to reinforce the relevance of CBC Radio-Canada and its presence in the life of Canadians. In order to do this, the public broadcaster will consolidate its links with Canadians by offering them content to which they can gain access in the way, in the place and the moment when they wish to do that. And this digital shift is part of our strategy, but we are not intending to abandon our services and conventional media as well. If you want to do this type of change, it's not going to be easy, and it's clear that this effort will ask a great deal of all of us. Canadians and our listeners have to be reassured. In such a large, diverse country as ours, the public broadcaster has the additional responsibility of making the right choices, and the board is certainly fully aware of that. Between now and 2020, the measures announced in our strategy will mean that CBC Radio-Canada will be a more flexible, agile organisation, and it will be financially viable.
We'll have the right infrastructure, services and business model in place to thrive in a dynamic and increasingly global media landscape. Sur ce, j'aimerais passer la parole à notre PDG, président.
And I'd now like to give the floor to our CEO and President, Mr. Hubert Lacroix, who will talk more about the transformation that we are carrying out as we implement our new strategy, and we are creating this space for all of us. So thank you very much, Hubert. I am now giving you the floor. Thank you very much, Rebecca and Rémi. And thank you for taking the time to be here, and welcome to those watching online across the country. Of course, people are very passionate about this place and its future. They're very interested in that. And that's a good thing. It's important. The mobilization that we've seen over the last few days have clearly shown to what an extent Canadians are profoundly attached to CBC Radio-Canada. And that is important because we are counting even more than ever on your interest in your public broadcaster at this turning point. We're going through a difficult period. It's chaotic, and there's lots of different challenges involved. There are changes which are disturbing our industry, and these are not letting up. It's relentless. We are totally in the midst of a workforce adjustment. This is a necessary consequence of the changes which are occurring in the media landscape and the pressure that is coming down on all of our revenue streams. As with all the other conventional broadcasters, such as the BBC, ABC France Télévisions, and even RT in Ireland. We have to face unstable business revenues, which are moving towards the digital, and the parliamentary appropriations are going down. And we also have to deal with a broken business model. It's no longer working. That is why we need to take steps to become financially viable, financially sustainable. Now, to be quite simple about this, our operating costs are much higher than all of our income, all of our revenue. Last week, close to 400 of our colleagues were notified that their positions would be eliminated. We knew that that was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. We announced this back in June. And whatever people say about my intentions, I find it very difficult to make this sort of announcement. But we have to get going, and we have to deliver our plan for the future. But there's lots of events swirling around us. There's theories of conspiration, insinuations of political pressure, personal attacks, scandals, and critical comments that are often virulent and very bitter. So before I go any further, I'd like to address a few of these issues. What has frustrated me the most in the last few weeks is the idea that I'm somehow here to hurt the public broadcaster and what it stands for, in particular for French speakers, francophones in this country, and that my objective is to dismantle it. Like many of you in the room, I grew up with Bobino, Fonfreluche, The Nature of Things, Henri Bergeron, Bernard de Ron. And I even worked within CBC Radio-Canada for several years in one of the departments. CBC Radio-Canada is part of who I am. And as you perhaps know, I have two young daughters who are 3 and 6. I took up this job because I wanted to make sure that the public broadcaster would be part of their lives as well, and that they would be able to grow up being well-rounded, well-informed, and have entertainment with this type of quality programming from the public broadcaster. That's what we're able to do.
We lose ourselves. I know that. That's why I come to work every day to make it better. The decisions that we have made have not always been easy. They've not always been obvious. And they surely have not always been popular. But they've always been made in the long-term interest of CBC Radio-Canada. You don't have to be behind a microphone or in front of a camera or actually live in a newsroom to care about our public broadcaster. Yes, I wear a suit, I work on the 12th floor here of this building, and I care. I care a lot. On the Gian Gomeshi situation, all I can say right now is that we are making every effort to be as open and transparent as possible under the circumstances. You know that an independent investigation is underway. It will look into any and all allegations of impropriety in our workplace that have arisen as a consequence or as a result of this recent controversy. And it will cover everyone and anyone from unionized employees to managers to executives. It will also look at our processes. We will continue to inform employees and the Canadian public as the situation unfolds. Moi aussi, je veux parler maintenant.
And I too would like to talk about the issue of our independence. I wish to be extremely clear about this. CBC Radio-Canada is managed totally independently from the government, period. The public interest that we defend goes beyond private interests or the interests of the government of the day, whichever government that may be. This public interest is strong and independent. And it is on that sole principle alone upon which CBC Radio-Canada is run. From day-to-day management and our editorial choices and the defining of our strategies only depends on us. We take our decisions freely, free of any political interference.
In a very difficult transformation process. Its aim is to help us meet the challenges of an incredibly fast-changing media environment to which no conventional broadcaster is immune. This is difficult. It requires courage. The pace of change is relentless. Our employees are strong and resilient, and their commitment to this place and its values is truly inspiring, and I thank them for that. And the events of the past weeks and months, what they have done, they've made even clearer to me that we must evolve and that there's urgency in this evolution. Now more than ever, we need a strong public broadcaster, a source of content that helps shape our identity and enrich our democratic life. I've been carrying this message now for 7 years, and it's not going to change. We have a duty to ensure that CBC Radio-Canada remains a public service at the heart of the daily lives of each and every one of us. We have a duty to ensure that our children and grandchildren can count on this public meeting space that has played such a vital role in our industry and in our history. Certains de nos critiques pensent autrement.
Some of our critics think differently, they disagree. They simply believe that our past success will be a guarantee for the future. They really are anchored in status quo. They have no suggestions put forward to take this digital shift or to adapt to current trends. And as I will explain in more detail in a few minutes, those days are gone. The world has moved on. And in this type of annual meeting, that's a real proof in the pudding. People come along with their tablets, with their smartphones, with their computers, and one day there'll be no one left in the room. And the question and answer session is available, and it's accessible to someone in Yellowknife, just as it's accessible to you here in the room. So our discussions have to be based on the future and the choices to be made, which are based in facts. And we cannot just continue to discuss what we were in the past. And despite everything that's happened, we have accomplished some extraordinary things since our last APM in Toronto last year. Amongst other things, of course, we have broadcast the Sochi Olympic Winter Games, the most watched Olympics in Canadian history. More than 33 million Canadians, 97% of us, have actually tuned in to these games. 11 million of us, 11 million of Canadians followed these on online or on mobile platforms. And we have broadcast the FIFA World Cup, and we've noted that it was important to have mobile programming included. We've started working to offer new services such as Q.ca, new apps and original web content in order to complement our programming.
Presence in Halifax, and we'll soon do the same thing in locations around the country like Moncton, Windsor, and Gander, Grand Falls. We've led a successful bid for the 2018-2020 Olympics with Bell and Rogers Media. We kept Canadians informed during national tragedies in Moncton, Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, and very recently in Ottawa. We led comprehensive news coverage of provincial elections in New Brunswick.
Il va y avoir une période de questions après. Puis on vous entend pas parce qu'on est diffusé.
There'll be a period of questions afterwards, and you're not actually broadcast at the moment. You'll be able to come up to the mic later. If we can just continue just now.
Coverage, merci Rebecca, of provincial
Thank you, Rebecca.
Ontario and in Quebec, and of municipal elections across the country. And through it all, we've actually delivered a balanced budget. And with respect to our financial results for the year which ended March 31, 2014, or the first quarter that we ended on June 30, 2014, if you have an interest in them, I suggest that you go to our website where you'll find our annual report, our numbers, and management's discussion and analysis thereon. And if you have questions on them, we'll be happy to take them in the Q&A session in a few seconds. Donc, si vos résultats financiers ou nos résultats financiers...
So if these financial results interest you, then you can consult our corporate website and you'll be able to find our consolidated statement for the year that closed on the 31st of March 2014 and also for the first quarter of 2014-2015, and you'll also find the analysis from the board on these results, and you'll be able to put questions on this in the time to come. Now, if we're talking about the financial portrait, I also have to talk about what's happening in our industry, and I'm going to talk about the new definition of our industry. We're now not in the time anymore where in our industry we had TVS, CTV and Global. That's no longer the case. There are new players coming in, Vice News, for example, and news services as well. Launched in December 2013, Vice News, they already have more than 34 foreign bureaus. 7 more have been announced. And their YouTube site of Vice News is drawing in well over 130 million viewers per month. In October, Vice Media and Rogers announced the launch of a new 24-hour TV channel in Canada in 2015. And then there's the phenomenon of TV on the go, the OTT such as Netflix, but these types of sites are proliferating. In the past few weeks, CBS and HBO have both announced new services. In Canada, Rogers and Shaw recently launched their so-called Show Me service, and Bell Canada Bell Media just announced its project called Project Latte. And in our province, we've got La Presse, which has become La Presse Plus, and now the Gazette. And then also we're going to have the same thing with the Toronto Star. So traditional, conventional newspapers are going over to the mobile newspapers. And Google has recently invested $500 million in wearable technology so that this information, any type of information that's created, can actually become even more mobile. As the public broadcaster, we have a responsibility to closely follow our citizens' preferences and industry trends and stay relevant, whatever the platform or the size of the screen. And therein lies our dilemma. We need to accompany our audience towards digital media, digital networks, while recognizing that 89% of Canadians still watch TV live sitting in their living room based on the programming that we deliver to them, and they spend 27 hours a week doing this. So what will be the results of this development in 10 years' time? No one can accurately predict that. But one thing I do know is that there will be a public broadcaster, and our vision is to have it connected even more deeply with each one of you. Some content will remain in its current format, others will surprise you, will be produced based on this concept of mobility and intimacy that we are seeking. It will be more than just a simple extension or add-on to our traditional broadcasting services. We're going to have to reinvent these concepts of immediacy, interaction, and impact. We will use modern media technology to understand the stories that are of interest to you. And soon, You will be invited to come into the centre of a conversation with others across the country that share those points of view or share those interests within this public space where you will really feel that you're at home. That is why our new strategy is aiming to multiply and intensify connections with Canadians and between Canadians. As citizens of one of the largest national territories in the world, we expect our public broadcaster to provide a space that unifies us in our values, our beliefs, and our identity. Reaffirming our desire for vibrant public broadcasting is also about opting for an investment that is responsible and sustainable, that pays off for our country as a whole. Maintaining a voice we can call our own through a strong public broadcaster is a choice that Canadians make together. It's up to us. Thank you, and thank you, Rebecca. Thank you very much to Hubert and Rémi. So I'd like to invite you to come back at the end of the panelist discussion to answer questions, and that's the part of the first segment.
I think we should just watch this video to set the stage.
Bonjour, mesdames, messieurs, ici Joanne Prince.
Hello, I'm Anna Maria Tremonti, and you're listening to The Current.
There is a cash reward of up to 15% for tips that lead to fraud convictions. It also saves money by having you do our job for us.
Allumez votre ordinateur, votre tablette ou votre téléphone intelligent.
Vous présentons toujours
Je vous pose la question à vous aujourd'hui à la maison, comment interpréter?
Children were all taken to hospital, and also the family.
Violents causent des dégâts dans le sud de l'Ontario.
Violence and insecurity in northern Iraq.
Vous avez eu des réactions aujourd'hui?
Une réaction au cours des dernières semaines que j'ai eues.
Ça serait bon de manger un tout petit peu.
Alors, c'est le nouveau projet Studio 12.
So what have you done in a parking lot?
So, for the last couple of years, we have included as part of our annual public meeting a panel involving some of our greatest CBC Radio-Canada talent. And this is always very popular because you get to hear a variety of opinions on lots of issues, and also you get to ask your questions. Le thème de la rencontre.
The subject of the meeting today, as has already been mentioned, is transforming to reflect you, because Radio-Canada, CBC is changing, and so are you. And we are moving forward, as is the case with our listeners, our TV viewers, and our internet users. And just before we looked at the video we were talking about, but the industry for public broadcasting is really changing in Canada and abroad. Competition is changing, behaviour of listeners is changing, production methods are really evolving very quickly, and the content offering is changing at an accelerated pace. And as citizens, you have access to new ways of consuming content using new technologies. But paradoxically, radio and television remain the platforms which allow us to reach most of our listeners. So CBC Radio-Canada is in the middle of a transition between past models and future model to come. And we wondered how this transformation is actually going to pan out on the different platforms, on the TV and the web, and perhaps to get an idea of what's coming up, we're going to have a discussion with our panelists.
Introduce our sixth panelists. Et on va commencer par mon ami et collègue, M. Patrice Roy.
I'm going to start with my colleague, Mr. Patrice Roy. He started Maison de Radio-Canada in 1989. I'm laughing, so I'm not going to look at you. Patrice was journalist at Anjou for the first 3 seasons of this show, and he won a Gémeaux Prize in 1990. And since 2008, he's been your anchor at the Téléjournal Grand Montréal at 6 p.m. EC Télé, as well as hosting special information programs when there are big events in the political life of Quebec and Canada. So please, let's welcome Mr. Patrice Roy. Yes, good afternoon to all of you. Thank you.
Diana Swain is a CBC News senior investigative journalist and recently named as a host of CBC News Network. Diana's work is frequently seen on the national and CBC Television's flagship investigative program, The Fifth Estate. She also regularly fills in for Peter Mansbridge on the national. She has won the Gemini Award for Best News Anchor 3 times in a row and was the first woman in Canada to win the award. Please welcome Diana.
Charles Tissier, since 1992, has been hosting one of the most popular science magazines in the world. Découverte, have you seen his new Facebook, Charlotte? Yes, it's really worth looking at that. So whether as a reporter or as a host, he's also had the opportunity of participating in many special programs on events of historical importance, such as the tragedy of Lac Mégantic or the drama at the École Politique in Montreal. So please welcome Mr. Charles Tissier.
Bonjour, Charles.
Good afternoon, Charles. And my colleague, Christine Trottier, is pursuing a career that reflects her passion for arts as host and cultural journalist. Listeners and TV viewers of Radio-Canada have no doubt got to know her thanks to her art segments, C'est bien meilleur le matin, Montréal Exprès, which became Des Hôtels, Montréal Ce Soir, and Le Point. And after hosting the Daily Show, Beau Temps, Mauvais Temps, for 5 years on the airwaves of l'Espace Musique, she's at the helm every morning with La Mélodie de Bonheur on Ici Musique. Marie-Christine.
Mr. Mike Finnerty is currently in his 7th season as host of CBC Montreal's local weekday morning radio show, Daybreak. Mike has more than 2 decades experience as a journalist and a broadcaster, beginning at CBC Quebec City and then later in Montreal as a reporter. Mike has hosted CBC Radio Montreal's election coverage since 2006, and he also frequently hosts The Current across CBC Radio 1. Monsieur Mike Finnerty, bonjour.
Welcome. Good afternoon. And then last, but certainly not least, you all know this person because since 1990, Fabienne Larouche has written or co-written more than 1,200 hours of fiction for TV and cinema. And since the foundation of the Atios production house in 1999, she's been producing her own works and those of other authors. And I'm sure that you know some of her great productions, such as Unité 9, Trauma, or Virginie. So Fabienne Larouche, welcome as well to you. Thank you very much, dear colleagues.
Les applaudir chaleureusement.
Yes, you can give them a good round of applause. Now, Patrice, we're going to start with you. The subject today is transforming to reflect you. Radio-Canada, CBC is changing, so are you. So how does that actually have an impact on your daily life? Well, Rebecca, earlier, you can see to me in French, you said paradoxically Canadians, in the majority, they tend to still follow by TV and radio. And I think Hubert also cited a figure, I think it was 87%, wasn't it? So we have to bear in mind that when I'm talking about myself as a newscaster, and I'm sorry for my voice, and that's not my normal style, but I do have a problem with my throat. But we have to remember that this relationship is important in this crisis situation. We're going through a moment of crisis, that's obvious. And Hubert was talking about passion. There's concerns, there's a passion, there's real worries. And in that moment of crisis, we have to remember the relationship between the listeners, including you who are here and following us via internet, those who are interested in Canada and Radio-Canada. And I think that's what has to really be of prime importance here. Otherwise, when we're talking about news, when we're in this world where news is traveling very fast in this digital age, people need even more to have explanations so that we can actually tidy up this chaos which we often see in a day of news. But what has changed, for example, there's an extraordinary file that we were presenting, and here I'm advertising this. This was the Téléjournal yesterday, the newscast at 6 p.m., where we drew a comparison between Montreal and Toronto with two similar districts, but they were very different. There was one which was not planned in Montreal and the other one that was actually planned in Toronto, and we were listening to different citizens. But the difference is that if I say to my kids, look at this, they can look at it on the phone whenever, wherever, when they want. So our content travels around, as I could never even have imagined this on Twitter and Facebook and so on, and on different social networks. Now, we can't say to people, if you're not there at 6 p.m., you've missed it. People don't want to miss anything anymore. Now, I don't want to monopolize their time, but I think that we have to also bear something else in mind, and I'd like to really drive this home. Namely, in this digital world, and of course, it will become ever more digital. There's this major transformation. But in that new digital world, we still have two eyes, one nose, and one mouth. We need journalists. They're not going to be replaced by machines. They need to digest this and explain these news and understand these different complex relationships to try and give credibility, to see whether something has credibility or not. So that is our role in the digital age. We have to maintain that role. We stand there for credibility, so we need to have an army in order to be able to wage this battle. Of course, we'll be able to talk about that. Of course, the environment has changed. We've opened up the windows. We've thrown them open. 7 years ago, we said, just write into us. We still say that sometimes to the public. Now, some parts of the public are more engaged in terms of news. Often they want to give us news. They are starting to collect the news as well, aren't they? Yes, but they're also participating in the debate, the discussions. And the reaction of the public's actually guiding us and allowing us to evolve over time to know how we're going to deal with this the next day and the day after. So we're not closed in our studio walls. We're there and we're very present. The TV is really present. So if public is actually involved via Twitter and Instagram in collecting the news, what is the place of a newscast, the Téléjournal? Well, we still have an important role because we have to talk over the day. We all know what's happened. It's not at 6 p.m. that I discover something. I'm not informing you, Fabienne, who I think follows me every evening, and I'm not telling you about all the news because you work a great deal. Perhaps you haven't got time to keep up with it all, but I give you the context, and I give the accompanying interviews and more explanations, and that's what we do with the newscast. And Patrice, when you're talking about collecting news, of course, we have to have that validated. So how do you actually proceed once you get in all of this news, for example, that comes from citizens? Well, once again, I use my two eyes, my nose and my mouth. The journalists know we can't be replaced. We're not going to disappear. We're not going to be wiped off the planet. And people are right that they've got certain fears. But there needs to be an army of people behind all this because otherwise things are not going to work. And we need to have time to investigate all this, look into it in more detail. We've got our colleague in Jerusalem, for example, Sophie, sent off to Africa and so on. I really think that we need to have the foundation. It needs to be retained. Then afterwards, we've got lots of different pipelines, lots of different networks. We have to be rapid. We have to be everywhere. But we need to keep this foundation that needs to be maintained.
I think moving to a digital world doesn't mean that we diminish the journalism or the production that we deliver. It means it's delivered on a different platform. And it doesn't mean that you give up one to pursue another. To me, it's something that we're adding to our repertoire, adding to the way that we deliver to Canadians. And I have 2 children, one's in university. I don't know the last time he sat in front of a television screen. Notwithstanding the numbers of people who still do, that's not the way he consumes what he wants to get. But that doesn't mean he doesn't want to get it from CBC. It means he's getting it in a different way. I have a daughter who's a teenager who's a competitive hockey player. When we were in Sochi delivering the Olympics, her mom was on TV. You know where she was watching it? On the iPad.
Right.
I mean, that's the way she was getting the content. As a broadcaster, I see that as an opportunity for me to grow and to develop the way that I deliver my work in a different way. But more importantly to me, to someone who's been at CBC for 24 years and a Canadian the whole time, it matters to me how CBC positions itself. It matters to me that we have a CBC. I think we're growing. And I understand, you know, as well as anyone does, that we are shrinking on some levels. But I think that the conversations have to be separated sometimes. And I don't think going in a digital direction is a bad thing. For me as a journalist, it's been another opportunity to try to showcase my work and get it out there to people who might otherwise not have consumed it. So I think that the digital side is one discussion. I think the things that are happening around CBC, around budgets and cuts, is another discussion, and too often they're paired.
Mike, how does your audience contribute to your work? Does it?
It has revolutionized the way we do our morning show here in Montreal. The way people communicate with us is so organic. We have in the morning we have text message communication with our listeners, and the text messages are given in the number by the phone number, and so I know how many people have texted. Over the course of the last several years, we now have 13,500 people who regularly text us during the program. And they text us to make contributions. They text us because they'll be listening to the mayor and they'll say, ask him this. Or if he's answered in a way where they think, that's not right, say, hey, he just said this, you better check that out. I can't tell you the number of times that has made a difference in real time as the program is taking place. Just to have that kind of contact is a constant contact. Our program, at least one or most often 2 subjects a day, and sometimes more, come from people coming to us because of the way that kind of organic relationship has grown. And I would say I'd go further than to just talk about revolutions in technology, because obviously it is kind of awesome what's happened over the last even 5 years. But it's not just technology. It's the way people think about how they exchange with other media. The internet is a state of mind, if you will. I mean, it's empowered people. People talk back to you. They don't. It's nothing like what it was when I was a boy, and that has really changed what we do and changed it for the better. I love coming to work every day because I never know what's going to happen, and I'm always in such close contact with our listeners.
So this transformation is necessary, according to you, then?
I mean, it just is. I mean,
I
can't imagine doing the show the way we used to do it 5 years ago today. It just wouldn't work. I mean, it wouldn't make sense. And you know, I think that the people who listen to us just feel a tremendous sense of ownership over the program as a result. They see it as their morning show. And, you know, last night I was at this guy who has a restaurant in one of the neighborhoods here in Montreal, in Rosemont, who moved from Toronto a few years ago, married a Québécoise. They switched the channel between Marie-France Bazot, and like she's in the kitchen, it's Marie-France Bazot, and if he's in the kitchen, it's Daybreak. And he wanted to start up, he wanted to give back to the community. He wanted to start a thing where he collects socks for the homeless because he heard that as a documentary on the Sunday edition. So he reached out to me, do you think this is a crazy idea? Nope. And off it went, and he's already got this big kind of barrel of socks, and it just, I mean, that's the kind of way people reach out to us now. They really feel that we are theirs and vice versa.
Comment ça se reflète ça dans la création?
And how's that reflected in the creation of fiction programs? Well, I'm not there to inform, I'm there to entertain. It's a different matter. A good story is a good story. The TV viewers, well, you've got to go out and get the viewers where they are. And of course, whether we're back at home with my nieces, they're not going to see this on the TV directly. Often they'll catch up on Saturday, but a good story is always a good story. And what we can see in ATS, in our production houses, that there are people who want to come and see us directly. Do they contribute? Yes, of course. Today, we're very productive on social media. We've got our Facebook page, and we also intervene during the shows. But often it's more during the ads, because when you're listening to a story, you don't want to be sending in your feedback. So in fiction, we're there to entertain and to get the TV viewers in where they are. But how can you actually ensure that there's a good TV programs when you've got Netflix and Vice and others as well? Yes, you've got to be there. You've got to go and get them. You've got to be profitable. It's got to be worth it. You've got to get the TV viewers in. They're not going to come to us. It's us to go and get them. So that's the job that we have to do. And what Fabienne's not said, you also use this mirror image, a young person who sees the other young person on the screen, on social media and on the web. You're already recognizing that in a tangible way, and it's very present in your reality. Yes, today we live in society, so of course we want to resemble or look like society. That's part of the discussion. It's not like with the news, but that's what we're doing. Well, we've all got our cross to bear. Well, Patrice and myself, we're always together, and I'm very happy because there's 30 seconds between us two for the ads. That's all that separates us. That's great. You're almost stuck to me. That's great. Now, do you want us to leave you alone for a while? But anyway, how do you ensure that you can get the loyalty of TV viewers? Because we've been saying that you could look at House of Cards on Netflix, for example, and gobble that up for 4 hours. Well, that's interesting because I listen to House of Cards, and I listen to that for 10 hours when it comes out, but also Homeland, for example, Sunday night at 9 p.m. because I really love that. So people come and listen to Unité 9 at 8 p.m. on Tuesdays because they want to follow that with us. And people still get together to follow this sort of show. Because as I've said, a good story remains a good story. And that's my job. And if you miss it then the next morning, no, we couldn't work together. I'll have to go off and just get some chocolate cake now. Now, Découverte, this is a very, very popular program. It's very present. It's on all of the different platforms, such as ici, Tout TV, ici, Explora, ici, Radio-Canada. So with these flagship programs, Découverte, how does that actually embody all of the values of the public broadcaster? We do our best, but with the budgetary reductions, we can't do it as much as we would like to. We started 3 weeks late, and there were some repeats. And at the prime time, we've got some repeats for. There's one that's a repeat again. So that means we are doing our work in terms of the quality of our work. And when it comes to the quantity of our offering, it's really reducing. In the 21 years of Découverte, I've never gone through that. I've been at Radio-Canada for 40 years. There have been one budgetary cycle after another. I think we're about 600 or 700 million cuts that I've seen since I've been at Radio-Canada. I've never seen cuts like this, and the cuts that are being imposed on us are part of this wave, but at the end of this wave. So I think we've gone too far. We don't have enough resources to do what we have to do and do it correctly. And Radio-Canada is a cultural institution which is of capital importance in French and in English. And this institution has to be supported by the successive governments that have accompanied us. And there needs to be reinvestment to help us to do our work correctly. We're talking about the digital shift. Of course, we have to make this a digital shift. It is important to do that. But when it comes time to do that, we've got disinvestment. We've talked about La Presse. What has La Presse done when it did its digital shift? There were 60 million extra investments. What are we doing? We're actually cutting. And I would like to add something here. And in Découverte, we're doing remarkable work with the web to actually roll out our programs on that platform. For example, there was a report on the web which was really remarkable on exploration, possible exploitation and the environmental consequences, for example, in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and Anticosti, and that was all spelled out on the web. And we did the same thing with the small probe and also with Lake Megantic. So we are undertaking this digital shift, but we've got diminished resources. And those who are the driving force behind this, the young people, are being put out the door. So this has to stop, and the government has to understand that Radio-Canada, CBC, is an essential institution in this country, and we need to be supported. We need their support. Yes, I've taken up what you've said. Should we compete then with other players? No, it's hard to hear, isn't it, at the moment? We want young people, as being chanted in the room. Thank you very much, sir. I feel that I'm involved. So should we compete with big players such as Vice? We talked about Vice earlier. Well, why not? We should compete with everyone. But what we're saying is that we need to be given the means to do this. We've got an immense amount of talent in-house, but we just need to be given the resources and just watch as we're going to be doing great work. But at the moment, we're being cut off. It's the power behind CBC that's doing this, and it's not because it's the Conservative government. Look at what the Liberals did beforehand. It's nothing new, all of these cuts. Now, that's true. Right, well, we'll be coming back to that during the question period. You can put questions directly, but now I'm going to turn towards Marie-Christine Trottier. Thanks very much, Charles, who's an expert in the cultural domain and everything to do with musicians. And I'm not from Charles' generation, and I've gone through many changes, even though I haven't been here as long as Charles. I know what you're talking about when we talk about transformations, changes in CBC. Yes, it's true with the digital and the immediate world, and it's all become very organic, and we need to be close to people and the regions. It's really important when you're a host. It's so important for someone who lives to the north of Sudbury who writes into me, or someone who's in the north of Alberta. I'd like to talk about people in the north, but there's people who are listening to us from everywhere, and it's the first time that I'm really living through this as a host. Before, we received letters sometimes, or there was someone on the phone who took calls, but of course that doesn't work like that anymore. So that's one side of this. We're talking about having a supported platform, but we need to have the content that follows this basis, this support. And we cannot deny the fact that where I'm working, positions have been abolished. And one of the most noble positions in Radio-Canada is the researcher position. The researcher is someone who plays a crucial role when we're transmitting knowledge. They have to look at the research of knowledge and do research into subjects to ensure that the host comes out with silly things or something that doesn't add up. So the researcher and the producer, we need all of these noble professions that we've known here. And now we're being told that we have to shrink all of this and have something that's more up to date, and we need to look to the future. Once again, I'm not against progress. I'm not a Luddite. No one here is against progress. It would be impossible to be against progress. And now I'm working in the musical domain. I've worked in lots of different sectors here, but now I'm really dealing with the musical segment at EC Musique, and we've had the crisis with records, for example, when everything went digital. And then the streaming came in, and Spotify, Google, NPR, and all the rest. Radio continued, listeners continued to listen to us, but it will never replace someone who speaks to you and someone says that music, well, perhaps you'd like it if you got to know it. So I'm worried when I just listen to music non-stop. And now, Rebecca, we work together for the same studio, and we try to think about all of this because, of course, we have to be inventive with these cuts. So we try and we think of ways in which we can get people in, and we develop our web page, and we try to be really connected into what's happening. We try to get the exclusive moments where we can listen to music. We try and establish communication, direct communication. We adapt to the changes. But we want this to be backed up. We've got excellent people putting contents on our web page, but we know that we're moving further towards this. But I've got lots of listeners who've not yet got a computer. So what should I say to these people? I say, well, it'll come. Perhaps you'll get one at Christmas. No, that's not what I say. Now, musicians, of course, have been forced to adapt to these new realities as well and use the social media and Twitter, Instagram. For example, with Taylor Swift, started using it very quickly. That's one example. But how can CBC and Radio-Canada keep this close link with the artistic community? Well, Mike was talking about citizens earlier who directly contact him. They can send in, for example, a question to the Mayor of Montreal, and that's what we do as well. For example, this morning, Fred Pellerin, well, everyone was having a love-in with him. He'd launched his album, and I put the question to Fred Pellerin on behalf of people, and he answered. So he was he answered by Twitter. It was all visual. You have to use imagination here. And Rebecca, I would like us to come back to the past. There's a great deal of nostalgia, of course, in what we're saying. I'd like us to come back to performance and really capturing of this, but it's very difficult to see all of that actually disappearing. I think we have to find some way of having live shows on air again, and would that be a way of keeping the link with the artistic community? Yes, absolutely. Patrice, you'd like to add something? Charles, earlier you put a question. People were talking about Vice News. I've been hearing that for a few months now about this, and it's very fashionable to talk about Vice News. There's lots of clicks, but there's no context. And they go out into all of the different markets in the country and they put videos up on anything. Anything goes. Anything's acceptable. That's not what we want to do in Radio-Canada with our newscasts. That's not the model we're moving towards. We need to, journalists have said, to verify of this, to see whether there's more credibility attached to this pizza, so to speak. When we go digital, doesn't mean we do any old thing, because Vice News is very successful for a certain sector of the population. Is it in the Far West? Is that what you're driving at? No. Vice News is sent out over the web, but it's a news model where they're playing at the frontier between entertainment and news, and it's mixed up, but there's no context, and it's exactly the opposite of what we need to continue to do. Namely, we want to give people context, have a serious investigative journalist, and check again, see whether this is true or not, and explain all of that. And to come back to what was already said, we need to have people, we need to have live people, we need to have journalists involved in all scenarios. We need to have a newsroom. And yes, we need to have young people, as we've said on Tout le monde en parle. We're sad when we see young people leaving. We need to find some way collectively together of ensuring that talent doesn't walk out the door. And that has happened. They go elsewhere. If people are gifted by Radio-Canada, off they go. We want to be the pole that's attracting them all in. News, I don't know if it's efforts are solar or hard, we're one or the other. I think, Fabienne, aren't we? I'm news with information. Perhaps you're the heart, or I'll take the soul and you take the heart. I don't know, whatever you want. But anyway, that is very valuable. And that's why people feel passionate about this. And that's why you're reacting this way, Shell. And that's why people came on Sunday and joined this march, because they're profoundly attached to that way of doing things. And just give me one last second. Now, of course, I listen to everything and I read a lot as well, and I hear people. And there's some people in the House who think this as well. Who think people are resisting change and they're stuck in the past. But I'd invite all of you, and you can call me up, but I'd invite you to come into our studio. There are 12 people working there 1 year ago, but now it's all being computerized, and there's just 3 people who are working in there. And they work really hard. It was a very difficult transition. We've accepted that. It was very difficult for people who were losing their job. Of course, they didn't want that to happen. But we said, OK, that's the new way of producing TV with less people. But there were efforts, there were technical problems, there were tears. Fortunately, we've got less of that now. Less technical problems. So for those who think that there hasn't been any transformation, that's not true. There have been enormous transformations. There's less people around me when I'm doing my newscast, and we do more with less. But as Charles and others are saying and have said, there is a limit. It's a question of how far can we go before it's too much. Everyone agrees that there needs to be transformation. We're living out this transformation. Of course, we've all got our smartphones and everything.
Conversation sometimes takes us in odd directions, because I think there are 2 conversations happening in parallel all the time. They keep crossing and getting mixed up. I mean, I don't think there's anybody in this room that I can imagine who is in favor of cuts. There hasn't been anyone that I've worked with at CBC in 24 years who's been in favor of cuts. Right. I mean, it defies your imagination. Every one of us knows what our colleagues do, and we understand what we lose when we lose any one of them, what they contribute to what we do overall, what we put out on the air, what we communicate to Canadians. There's nobody who's championing that. Then there's this other discussion about what do we do going forward and how do we present ourselves.
Because we have to go forward, yes.
You go forward or you stop. There really aren't a whole lot of choices, and I think all of us want to find a way to continue to be relevant. We also want to continue to find a way to be able to hire people,
which is why
and not always see them going out the door.
Which is why I want to go back to ce que Patrice tu disais à propos de.
So, Patrice, what you're saying about Vice, it's true, it's sexy, it's attracting 130 million viewers and so, but you've had your second already. You've had even more than a second.
Diana and Mike, should we compete with them? Should we compete with them? Of course. We already do. Ta seconde. Diana and Mike, we haven't heard you in a while.
You've had your second.
Competing on some level with whatever else is out in the marketplace since CBC began. Right. I mean, certainly the number of competitors was a lot smaller. The platforms in which we were competing were a lot smaller. But we've been competing the whole time. We should continue to compete.
We should continue to compete,
if we're
is what
not
you're saying.
Good at our jobs, that's the way to find out. We are good at our jobs. I'm not afraid of competition.
Okay.
I never have been. I'm not afraid of Vice. I'm not afraid of Google. I'm not afraid of whatever else you're putting out there. CBC delivers a good product across the country. It always has. Bring it.
Well, I think...
Bring it. Oh, I like that. Bring it.
Look at when Canadians are faced with a crisis, where do they turn? They turn to Radio-Canada, they turn to CBC. I know when I was not working in the afternoon, I'm a morning show host, where did I go? I went to Patrice, who was on Radio-Canada, and to Peter Madbridge on the CBC. The fact that we are the public broadcaster means that there is a great deal of pressure on us to be accountable to the Canadian people, and we have the authority, and you see it when the shizzle hits the fan. And that's what happened a couple of weeks ago, and I thought we demonstrated. I was very proud that day. I was moved. I was glued to my TV and my radio, and you know, that's where people go to when they need to. And do we compete with Vice? We mop the floor with Vice on that.
Wow.
You know?
You guys are so combative. We mop the floor, bring it. Merci à nos panélistes. On a terminé.
Thank you very much to our panelists. That's the end of that discussion, but please remain up on the scene. I'd like to invite Rémi and Hubert to come back up because we're going to continue now. Yes, you can stay here, Patrice. We're going to continue now with the question period. We've got around 30 minutes, and I'd like to remind you once again of the same addresses that were given at the beginning: EP at Radio Canada.ca/APM@cbc.ca, and also you can participate on Twitter with the address that's up there on the screen, RCAPA, that's the hashtag there, or also CBC-APM. So first of all, a question for Hubert. You announced in June that you were cutting 1,000 to 1,500 posts to finance the transformation of Radio-Canada. What costs so much, and what do you want to achieve to oblige you to actually remove a quarter of your staff? Well, it's not easy in Radio-Canada with this situation. There's about $1 billion that comes from the government, a little bit less, and the rest is $500 million, which are absorbed by our own activities. And in this environment, we're out of the $500 million. There's about 80%, which are advertising revenues. You've heard that advertising revenues in TV are migrating towards the digital platforms. And you also see that we've had an increase in our operating appropriations apart from inflation. Since the last time we had an increase was in 1973, so we've got a model that's no longer working. If we want to have flexibility to reinvest in our future, then we have to realize that our income, our revenue is under pressure, so we need to give ourselves some room for manoeuvre, and that's why we've got the strategic plan. When I hear Charles and his the cry from the bottom of his heart, I very understand what he's driving at. Yes, a second question, 30 minutes. Once again, Hubert. Both the population and the Radio-Canada CBC workers are against this transformation step. So when are you going to actually step back or resign? Yes, that question comes up often.
Around the panel, around this evolution and where we're going. Je pense que ça, c'est aucun doute.
There's no doubt about that. Let's talk about the program, about my possible retirement at the end of my term of office, but I very much believe in this direction. We're going to continue to be flexible. When I look back on the history of CBC Radio-Canada, often the CEOs, the presidents are asked to resign, but those who are asking for resignation have not actually put forward any suggestions for other forms of finance or to have a vision that would allow us to go in that direction. So what I'm saying is that we're going to continue to do our work. We very much believe in it. And what you've heard about this shift and the current environment, that's where we're heading. I'll take a final question by email and then we'll go into the room. It's for the panelists.
Panelists would describe the internal culture at CBC Radio-Canada. Do employees feel united and collaborative as one single team, coast to coast, or are there too many silos and internal competitive behaviors? Qui veut prendre cette question?
It's getting better.
It's getting.
Who wants to take that question?
40 years, and unfortunately, for most of those 40 years, we lived the two solitudes between Radio-Canada and CBC. And yet, if we pool our resources, we can be extraordinarily powerful on all levels. And we're starting to do that now. For instance, à Découverte, recently, we broadcast a report from the Fifth Estate, right. Silence of the Labs. On a traduit ça par...
We translated that by science and power that's actually being gagged. So is science actually having a gag put on it because of governmental decisions?
We had the chance of throwing the water bottle on the floor.
And that's what happens behind the scenes. Exactly.
Well, at least, we're communicating. So what we did was we had this report that we were able to work with, and we added some francophone Canadien Français Québécois content, and we made a great story. And there were no holes barred in that story. It was an extraordinary story, very critical, but very objective on what's happening. And that is an extraordinary example of what we can do when we pool our resources. Ça commence à se faire de plus en plus.
We're starting to do this more and more. We're starting to speak more between the CBC and those who are working Radio-Canada to do things together when it's possible. So it's really improving.
There is more sharing, right, between, in particular, the investigative units. And I think that there's power in that. I would find that sometimes at government level that they would try to say, well, the story's not that big because it's regional. Only English covered this story or only French covered that story. If we work together, that excuse is gone. And in particular in that, the Silence of the Lads that you talked about, because you make these stories national, because you are forcing on the agenda the fact that Canadians, French or English, it doesn't matter, care about the same things largely, especially accountability at the government level. If we share our resources, if we share our talents and our knowledge, and we make sure that all Canadians see it, all Canadians put the pressure for accountability. So journalistically, there's huge traction to be had in that. But even on the other side, we were talking about the fact that when I was in Sochi earlier in the year, I'd been to the Olympics before for CBC, and it was the two solitudes, English and French. I don't even know if I ran into anybody in Beijing. In Sochi, we were physically in the same space working together and trying to manage the work as well as we could and trying to help each other. It's not always easy. There are language barriers. I'm the one with the earpiece in today. But we are all trying to manage that and to work better together than we have in the past.
But it's getting better. Okay, donc
de mieux
en mieux.
Huge changes, Rebecca. There are huge changes. When I used to work here, sort of even 5-6 years ago, the TV and the radio were on different floors, and the arts were on different floors within CBC in Montreal. Now we're all in the same space.
That's true.
It's a huge difference. When I work at the Current, it's not just that we work together on the same floor as it happens, but there's part of the team is in Vancouver and participates in discussions via video link. So absolutely silos are being broken down. The CBC, I think, is more connected as a workforce than it has ever been in my memory.
Certainly ways to go, though. I think everybody would acknowledge that.
On va commencer par prendre des questions.
So we'll take questions in the room. I'd like to remind you to put short questions and just one question per person, because there's many of you that have lined up at the mics, and we want to give lots of opportunities. Good afternoon. I'm Nadia Alexandre, and I think that it's not a secret that Mr. Harper really wants to dismantle Radio-Canada. He wants to privatize everything. So we have to really increase the funding for Canadians so that Radio-Canada CBC can survive. And for the board, if the majority of the people on the board of Radio-Canada make financial contributions to the Conservative Party, action speaks louder than words. Do you have a question? I would like
trying to be so competitive that we lower the standards of Radio-Canada to the lowest common denominator. I resent that. I want les enjeux politiques to be discussed.
We need to discuss what's at stake, political
issues, and chapeau to les journalistes who
and well done to all of the journalists.
But I don't want the Peter Mansbridge and his group of people who discuss things to tell me who's winning and who's losing. I don't want to know who's winning and who's losing. I want political issues to be discussed.
Okay, and you feel that they aren't right now. Vous n'avez pas de questions, par contre.
You don't have a question.
Mission enquête, bravo, chapeau, fantastic.
Merci.
There's no equivalent in the English language.
D'accord, on va faire le message à Alain Gravel. Merci, madame.
Thank you. We'll get the question across to the right person. Yes. Do you have a question, sir? I'm Pascal Géridon, and I have a question for Hubert Lacroix. Now, by way of introduction, when I listen to Mr. Lacroix, I have the impression that I'm listening to a politician. Someone who's hiding behind a theme here. It's the media crisis that you're hiding behind, the fact that we need to transform or renew things. But don't do more than what you do. That's what Camus said. So I have the following question. If it takes an army of people, as Patrice Roy has said, to pursue good democracy and the right culture here in Canada, when are you going to be able to tear your shirt before the government? Say, look, we need to get funding, we need to get people, and let's stop hiding behind this screen so that we really get the resources to allow our democracy and our culture to continue to live. Well, in the world in which we live, the media environment is changing. It's not me that's invented that. I'm not hiding behind that. I'm trying to do that and react to this in the best way possible with the board of directors. Well, you don't seem to be too worried. You're talking about all of this in a positive way. Well, I'm disappointed that you think that I'm not worried by all of this. From the very first day, because I've been in this job for 7 years now, and from the first day onwards, the first slide that I put up on the first speech was about funding of CBC Radio-Canada. One of the 18 public broadcasters, we had $33, and it was about 90, but now it's much higher, and we've got lower contributions. It's always been the same thing. If we had more dollars, we could do a great deal. I can hear that, and I also understand that in the current environment, since 1973, they've never actually changed anything with the operating appropriations apart from to adjust them for inflation, and not even each year. So the objective of the board is to see whether this door is closed, and if that door is closed, how can we actually increase our financial means? And that's where the conversations are taking place. You're aware of that. And when I hear this concept being bandied around that me or that the board thinks that it's satisfying, that it's nice to make cuts with the talent that we've got, and our corporation or have to shrink down the reality of the environment in which I'm living, because we are all attached to the public broadcaster, and we want this to continue. And so we continue to talk about funding, and we're trying to find means to be able to fund our public broadcaster. And the 2020 plan that everyone's discussing at the moment, that's the direction that we want to take. Could we perhaps intervene? Well, I feel rather ill at ease, because I'm not an employee of Radio-Canada. Radio-Canada is my client, and I'm ill at ease. But I'm not the only one who's ill at ease. There's other people who'd like to talk to you, but they don't dare to do that because there's so much tension. So I'm just wanting to say to you that one day, I see Justin Descent, we are the main people in Radio-Canada, because I wrote to Virginie for 14 years. From the first 7 years were produced by Radio-Canada, and the 7 others were produced by ETS, my own production house. I didn't want to produce Virginie. That was not my intention, never. But one day, Daniel Go, who was here, I am looking over to you, I'm talking to you. But anyway, I was asked to come into the office, and I was told that I would have to start producing. I didn't want to do that, but I noticed that day that people didn't really know how much Virginie cost, and we became the private producers, and we started to produce for Radio-Canada. But before, it was Radio-Canada that actually produced all of this itself. So for better or for worse, some are going to say for worse, but others are going to say for better, because it's given me work, and I get other people working as a result of my work. So at one point, we were making a completely different. I produce 30 Vies in the same way as I would do with Trauma or other TV series at $112,000 per hour. We've done that. One day we said, right, we haven't to start complaining about this. We just have to get organized. So what's bothering me here, because I work with great people in Radio-Canada, but it seems that there's no discussion. People aren't getting organized. I've got ideas to share with you, and for Hubert and for others to share with you. Now, I don't do newscasts, but it's difficult for people who are working here. If you go down into the basement in Unit 9, where we're filming Unité 9, and there's many technicians that I work with in Radio-Canada, and they're not just good, they're excellent. We're going to New York at the weekend for international awards, and I'm going to send a letter to everyone to say you are the best. But even the population and my family from Lac Saint-Jean, I can't even explain to them that, yes, the costume department is important, but it's not as important as jobs, and we're going to still keep the best costumes. And there's journalists who called me up and said, Fabienne, do you use the costume department? No, we've got a production budget for our costumes. We don't actually go there. And she didn't want to listen to me. It's become such a violent environment that I was telling her the truth, and she didn't want to listen to me. And it's really tough. I almost feel like leaving because I don't feel that I'm part of your discussion today. I feel very ill at ease, as if I don't fit in. I just wanted to actually express and say that I'm not the only one. But for all of us, Radio-Canada is really important, but at the same time, things move on. It's moved on for us and for drama and for fiction. Things are moving, and we have to continue to see how we can continue to work with a smile on our face and in an enthusiastic way, because we're in the creative industry. I'm talking about what I'm doing, fiction and dramas. Now, of course, it's different when you're dealing with newscasts. I'm not going to talk about the news segment. That's not my area. But I think it's a real pity. I've listened to you, and I saw you down there, and you seem really aggressive. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, perhaps I need to drift off here. You know, I feel like slinking off. You're saying, but I'm feeling this. I'm thinking, no, I'm not pleading in favor of one person or another. I'm just saying there's people here, and there's people who are feeling ill at ease with this situation. Yes, we can feel the tension. We realise that. And sorry, yes, thank you very much for sharing that. Now, we will continue. Just a minute, please. Could I answer? Now, who's speaking now, please? Thank you very much, Fabienne. Who next? No, thank you very much for that. Yes, we have a question. Just one question, quickly. Well, it wasn't the question I was going to put, but now she's saying that I'm looking maybe aggressive. Now, if you've got a question, well, first of all, I come from the QP, so yes, I'm going to put a question to Mr. Lecroix. I would like to know why you're not out in the public square publicly asking for an increase in public funding. That's what I want to know. Why are you not out there asking for that? And it's a real pity there's not going to be any studios, because we're going to go down from 12 studios to just one in the new restructuring. That's a pity, because I'd like you to be able to produce your shows within the Radio-Canada studios, because they're very good programs that everyone's still working. Right, we've just got 50 minutes. I think Hubert has already answered the question, which was quite similar, but I can answer again, and perhaps I can also listen to Louis talking about production and what's happening in-house and the choices that we are taking. But sorry, you haven't actually answered the question, Hubert. Which question are you referring to? The question is, why are you not publicly standing up and asking for an increase in the budget for Radio-Canada CBC? Yes, I'll answer that question, says Hubert. I'd like to repeat. The last increase in the operating appropriation was back in 1973. That's a fact. That's a fact. So when we're confronted with that fact and we want to increase our financial flexibility, do you really think that at the moment, with the government, whoever the government may be, but with this government, it was the same with other governments. You said it was the same thing with the Liberals. Do you really think that we're going to actually get an increase in our basic funding? Just a moment, please. That's why you think that we're not asking for this. But I'd like to repeat that all of the different interventions that I have been undertaking over the last 7 years have been aimed at increasing our financial manoeuvrability and room for manoeuvre. It's not just the basic appropriation. There's also the fund for improving local programming. That was very important for us. And we got about $50 million for Radio-Canada to be able to have local and regional content. But the CRTC decided that had to be died off. And Cogeco and Bell and Videotron are actually getting our signal and are actually making money with the content that you produce without sending in dollars to us from the subscribers for the content that is produced. It's this model which means that all of the broadcasters, we're with like TVA and CDV and Global, we're all producing content and we're looking for one thing. We want to ensure that the work that's done by our artisans should actually be remunerated. And that is the big question that we put for this ERTC and the conversations that we constantly have publicly. So there are other ways of getting some financial flexibility rather than just asking for a request where the answer is always that the public broadcaster gets $1 billion per year. We have to realise, yes, we understand if there's more money, there would be more flexibility and we'd be able to produce more content, so we'll give them more resources. I understand that. I get that. Well, I'd like to interrupt you because there's just 12 minutes and there's other questions to come from the web. There's one that's directed, it was question 4 to Louis. Bill, yes? I can't see you down there. Good afternoon, Louis. What is the SRC going to do to ensure that there can be a varied local programming content for all of the Francophone communities in the country? Yes, it's quite a challenge because, as Hubert has mentioned, we've gone through a period. We did have specific funding for diversifying local programming content. We've made a commitment to remain present in each of the regions in the country. We've had to make choices. The main choice that we've made is to continuously offer 7 days a week news programming from all the different local stations. That's our minimal position, and that's what we're working on. But I'd just like to draw a small comparison with the past. But just 7 years ago, the level of local programming in all of the regions of the country was smaller than it is now, despite the difficulties that we're facing. But it's true, we do need to make choices. First of all, we have to ensure that we can keep this link with our TV viewers and listeners and those who are consulting us on mobile platforms, because in the region we've got mobile platforms as well. So we have to ensure that we keep these links 7/7 in terms of news and all of the different platforms, the TV, the radio and the web. And then gradually we want to be able to offer different types of programming if we have the funding so that we can also travel out to the regions. Now, talking about mobility, thank you very much, Louis Lalonde, who's the VP for French Services.
Morning on CBC Radio. I don't own a computer, comme tu disais. Why is CBC emphasizing digital and mobile? What about those of us who are loyal radio listeners?
We are emphasizing mobile and digital because the world is changing, but we are staying with, we're still on 88.5 FM and we will continue to be on 88.5 FM here in Montreal. And we're very aware that there are listeners who get in touch with us. That person, I don't know how they got in touch with you without a computer, though. I'm beginning to wonder about that.
Maybe by phone. Maybe by phone. BlackBerry, I don't know.
It could be, okay. But, the radio is, of all the media here, I think the oldest, right? For CBC Radio-Canada, and we're still going, and we're a pretty vital group of people, and there's an incredible attachment, as that message testifies, and we're not going anywhere.
Great.
Just to tell you how vital they are, morning shows across the country, 20 of 23 morning programs across CBC, 1, 2, or 3 in their respective markets, and in 12 of those markets, they're number 1. Alors, quand on parle d'être pertinent,
talking about being relevant, then CBC Radio is a good example. We've got 8 minutes. Yes, sir, in the room, please. One question, just one question. For Mr. Hubert-Lacroix, I'd like to know why the management of Radio-Canada buys in, for example, Downton Abbey, which comes from PBS in the US, or scientific productions from the BBC, which come out on Découverte, but it's much more logical to actually put dollars into good CBC productions, such as The Nature of Things of David Suzuki or The Fifth Estate, and And I have the impression we still have these two solitudes today. So perhaps the Commission of the Official Languages needs to get involved officially so that we can encourage the two sides to actually talk to each other, because sometimes even foreign correspondents might be bilingual and could give better coverage of the planet. You could have a French correspondent and an English-speaking correspondent in Washington. Could you not just send down a bilingual correspondent and have somebody else that would then be able to cover Moscow and Beijing? I think we can really improve things there. There's two parts to your question. I'll ask Louis to answer on the first part. Well, on Downton Abbey, I'll give you a very simple question because it's awfully good TV. And when we're a public broadcaster, you have to ensure that you give access to the viewers what is actually the best in the world and not just do some self-improvement. And then secondly, if you listen to Radio-Canada and CBC, then no doubt you've seen 2 weeks ago there was an extraordinary investigative report, which was simultaneously beamed out on Fifth Estate, showing the development with certain Canadians that go outside the country and join the Islamic State to carry out this sort of crusade. There's Canadians that have followed them with the resources put forward by the CBC and Radio-Canada, and that was then put out the next morning out to us. So when we're talking about the understanding of what's happening in the country, that's what we're really driving at. And when we're talking about Shell pulling together resources from both sides, that's what we're doing. And if you actually follow the TV and not just think that you're listening to what people say about Radio-Canada, you'll be able to see that these events are happening more and more in terms of journalistic collaboration and also in other sectors. So that's what we are. Could Michel perhaps be given the mic to talk about for foreign correspondence, who is the director of news? Thank you very much for that question. Well, I was in fact one of the bilingual correspondents myself. It's true that that model worked for a long time, but it's more difficult today because you have to cover the radio and TV and web, and you have to do it in the two languages. It becomes almost impossible in terms of workload. And we have to be beamed out live on LDE. So it's not that we're not working together. We work together in a different way. We pool together resources. For example, if we have two teams in Iraq, one from CBC and one from Radio-Canada, we share the equipment. We pool together resources to ensure that we have access to the information twice. We've got that sort of balancing act that we do. And then when we've got correspondents who are bilingual and who are covering an event. We've got lots of examples with Jean-François Bélanger, who is our correspondent in Paris, and he was based in Moscow before. Jean-François, when it's relevant, he can actually produce reports for CBC as well. We are in direct contact with them each day, so we try to maximise as much as possible all of this so that we can really get the maximum advantage from our teams on the ground. So that is our answer. We work differently because we're asking our journalists on the ground to do more than they had to do before. Before they were just, for example, covering TV so they could be bilingual and cover both sides. But we've got an even bigger commitment to work together, nevertheless, because we've got less resources and we need to maximise these. Thank you very much, Michel. We've just got 4 minutes left. So 2 questions. No, I'd like to... should we go to the public? Yes. Yes. I come from Laval, and I've got a question to Mr. Roy and Miss Sween as well.
Vous nous disiez tantôt que malgré l'Internet...
You were saying that despite the Internet and all of this, you've continued to offer news and digest and select and filter all of this news. And I know that you're undergoing a transformation in CBC Radio-Canada, but if you're going through this transformation, could the news perhaps talk about subjects that are not covered by traditional media, that they don't dare to talk about? For example, as we see in Huffington Post or in certain websites as well. If you're going to transform, perhaps you could transform the news and actually take that path as well and move down that path too. Well, thanks very much for that question. Yes and no. Yes. I think we have to be open-minded to what's coming out on the market. news is like a big river. You've got big boats, all the different media who are describing this, and then you've got small vessels that you don't always see out in the water, and you have to see them as well. And we often see that in our teams amongst ourselves. We have to take off our blinkers and force ourselves out there, because often it looks like we're just doing the same thing as everyone else. Perhaps we have to push things a question further. We do try and do that, and sometimes you see that. And yesterday evening, I think that we saw that. We pushed the limits, comparing these two districts, but not to hammer home that point too much. But when we're talking about transformation, we're not talking about lowering the bar in terms of our requirements for credibility. It's either true or it's not true. You hear lots of different things in the media that you've cited, which are not necessarily checked out. And they turn out to be wrong, so we don't want to get too crazy. But yes, we do need to open things up. And it's true, we have to talk about things that perhaps we didn't mention so much in the past, either in Radio-Canada or in the US with the big networks. It shouldn't just be repetitive. We need to be open-minded. You're right. We need to open ourselves up to what's new, but with the same instruments, and we have to remain rigorous. Yes, would you like to intervene?
Sure, I can address it to the extent that we haven't already, but my view on this has been the same throughout my own career. We don't have to function as a business in the classic sense, but in many respects we do. If we aren't delivering what people want to consume, then really I'm broadcasting to my children and my mother, and that's it. I want people to watch my work, to listen to my work, to stop what they're doing when they hear my voice come on because they believe in what I have to say, that I'm important to their understanding of what's going on. So then it's my task to make sure that's what I'm delivering, which means I have to have my eyes open and I have to watch what people are consuming. It doesn't mean I am now going to talk on the program that I do, a news network, about Kim Kardashian's butt. I don't care.
I'm sorry, I find that funny.
I didn't care before it was available to me on HuffPost or anywhere else. But I do pay attention to what people are interested in. And as much as we've talked about being competitive with Vice, last week I watched a half-hour documentary produced by Vice that had incredible access that showed me parts of ISIS I had not seen. The work was good. It was very good. And I have no problem saying that about the competition. It reminds me that I have to be better. I'm not at all intimidated by what else is out there.
No, you said that we have to earlier.
Yeah, bring it.
You said bring it.
I mean it. And I think we have to pay attention to what people are consuming. It doesn't mean we dumb down. I don't think people are dumber than they've ever been. Expectations are higher than they've ever been, and we need to meet that.
That's absolutely true. Thank you. Merci, Patrice et Diana. Question.
Thank you, Patrice and Diana. Just a question from the floor. Could I just say something? Because I've been thinking about our conversation. To come back to what you said. Yes, it's true we could have produced it downstairs. That's true, but we're all going to have to produce elsewhere with the technicians from here. We're not going to stop, are we? We're not going to start. We're going to be elsewhere. We're going to continue creating things. And here I'm talking about fiction. Just intervene. Just 1 minute, please. Just one question. And then perhaps you'll be able to talk offline afterwards with the different presenters. Time's ticking away. Yes. I'd like to talk about the vision of the future of the population, which is more and more split. Is there a question? Yes, of course there's a question. That's why I'm there. I came up to put a question. I wrote the letter of resignation for Belacqua, which has been asked for by the population. And when are you going to sign it? And I'm going to hand it over to you with my very own hands. Well, I'd like to repeat that I have the intention of completing my term, the 5 years. I very much believe in public broadcasting. I've expressed this in lots of different ways. Our corporation is undergoing many changes because of the environment in which we're working. There's a great deal of talent here.
Said bring it. C'est comme ça que ça termine cette...
And that closes the 6th edition of the annual public meeting. Thank you very much for having been here with us, and thank you very much to all of the panelists.
Merci à vous tous de vous être déplacés.
Thanks also for all coming along, and thank you for having sent in your questions by email. And the questions that were put most often will appear on the corporate website of CBC Radio-Canada in the next few days. So turn to cbc.radio-canada.ca/APA or cbc.radio-canada.ca/APA. And thank you very much to all of you who have followed us via the web. That was the 6th edition.
Thank you again to our panelists. Merci. À l'année prochaine.
See you again next year.